Thank you, Dominic. This is, of course, a great pleasure for me to moderate this event on current situation in Belarus. More than 10 days has passed since another fraud-tainted election of President Lukashenko, who rules the country since 1994. These post-election days were full with sensations and news. The country is gripped by mass protests, numerous allegations of police brutality, processions of women in white with roses, and strikes at major state enterprises. We all saw these pictures. Just a few months ago, no one could probably imagine that rather small Eastern European country will be receiving maximum of public attention. That such media outlets as New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian, and Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung will have picture of Belarusian protesters on its cover page. Today, we want to look at the reasons behind such unprecedented and unique, in a way, awakening of civil society. We are honored to talk about Belarus today with our dear guests, with Mr. David McAllister, who is member of European Parliament and the chairman of European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. We are welcoming Ms. Olga Dryndova, who is a Belarus expert, editor on analysis on Belarus, or in German, Belarus-Analysen, at the Research Center of Eastern European Studies at the University of Bremen. And we are especially happy to welcome also Nepp, who is a journalist and the Vice President on Communications of European Youth Parliament in Belarus. So now I would like to give a word to every guest to provide us his perspective on current events. We have the guests with different expertise, so we'll be talking about this issue from different perspectives. I will be showing to our guests this table so they know what is the time left, so we can squeeze in this 1 hour and 15 minutes as much information as possible, and have a fruitful discussion afterwards with also you, dear guests. Olga, at first, I would like to give you the floor. As a researcher and Belarus expert, could you please explain to us what is so unique about current situation in Belarus? Why is today's Belarus so different from the other election years? Would we say that current regime is at its limits? Do you believe in the power of civil society to drive the change forward?
Thank you very much, Helena, for the invitation. Thank you to the guests for having interest in Belarus. I mean, these are quite a lot of questions. I mean, I could have talked just 1 hour answering these 3 questions. As long as I only have 5 minutes, I guess, I'll just concentrate on the main trends, maybe, without really explaining the very reasons of this politicization in Belarus, and maybe we'll come to that later, because it's really, you know, there are really a number of reasons that we have that. It's also interesting to concentrate on the trends, and you're right on those, you know, issues that are really different this time from the protests that we saw before, because I mean, it's not the first protest that we see after the elections in Belarus, because they have not been free and fair since over 20 years already, right? So the first trend, I would say, is a very broad politicization of society. And what I mean by that, I mean both regional scope. That means that protest moods are seen not only in Minsk, normally they were concentrated in Minsk, but also throughout the country, in the regions, and also in the smallest towns. So this is really new for a pre and post-electoral protest. I mean, we had some social protests like this protest of 2017 against the so-called social parasite law. It was also in the regions, but it was not, it had nothing to do, you know, with elections, and people were not mobilized by political reasons. So the reason there were social-economic reasons. And it's quite new that this quite a broad scope of society is really politicized and is united, so to say, under the slogan everybody but one, or everybody but Lukashenko, which is quite, you know, a political point. Also a huge wave of solidarity that we have already been observing since the beginning of pandemic, and I think it's just you know, a kind of coincidence that pandemic and presidential elections take place at 1 year, almost simultaneously. So people learned quite fast to self-organize themselves and to show solidarity to the victims of COVID, to the doctors. We witnessed a huge wave of solidarity during pandemic. And actually what I see is this, just this wave, so to say, has been transmitted in the political campaign. Now we see political, well, the wave of political solidarity. We see a lot of crowdfunding platforms helping people who criticized the government and lost their job, or helping the victims of repressions. So this this broad politicization solidarity, I would name, is the first trend. The second one is we don't see that classical, so-called classical party opposition that is played an important role in this politicization of the Belarusian society. So what we now see is really a kind of a grassroots movement, we can name it like that, because people self-organize themselves, people coordinate themselves in social networks, people use internet for self-organizing, but they still do not have a kind of a single political center. Well, we have Mrs. Tikhanovskaya, who is now in Lithuania, but she actually never called for protests. So it's actually a very interesting situation that the figure of Tikhanovskaya, I would name her a symbolic figure. She has become a symbol of protest, a symbol of solidarity, a symbol of unity, the new unity of Belarusian society against Lukashenko, but she is actually not coordinating political protest. And it's quite an interesting trend, because it also makes it more difficult for the government to control this protest. People are organizing themselves in social media and through personal contacts. The next one is, of course, the role of women. I cannot forget that, because I mean, it has not started. The whole politicization is just important to understand that. It did not start the very day that these three women, oh really, okay, so just have three trends. It did not start on the day when these three women united, but it started long before. But these three women, I see that they just gave another dimension to the whole protest, and they really managed to mobilize people. They gathered about 2 to 5% of local population in the regions, which is really unprecedented for Belarus, and no classical opposition before managed to do that. And also the solidarity chains of women after 3 nights of unprecedented repressions, women standing in white and women holding white flowers, they actually also gave another dimension to the protest movement that we see nowadays. Well, now I have to stop, but I still have some points, so we can talk about it later.
Yes, Olga, thank you so much for even being able to explain so many points in this 5 minutes. We definitely receive more questions regarding things that you now mentioned and many more. So we definitely come back to this during our discussion. And now let's integrate another aspect, an opinion, into this our discussion: the relations between Europe's longest serving ruler and the European Union. And for this, I would like to welcome Mr. McAllister. European Parliament was one of the first institutions that did not recognize the results of the elections from the 9th of August. From the European Parliament, we hear the voices for sanctions, and on the other side, also proposals to support NGOs and civil society in Belarus. Would you please summarize the position of current plans of Brussels towards Belarus? Perhaps you could also address a few points about today's EU Emergency Summit of Head of States. And you are muted.
Okay, now you can hear me, hopefully. Yes. Okay, well, first of all, thank you for the kind invitation to Schwarzkopf Foundation, and good evening to all of you here from Northern Germany. Well, you asked about the role of the European Union. The European Union, of course, has been closely following the developments leading to the so-called presidential elections. During the election campaign, the people of Belarus have demonstrated their desire for democratic change. The latest reports from Minsk and other cities in Belarus are impressive and they're shocking at the same time. Impressive is that 100,000 of Belarus citizens are peacefully standing up for their citizens' rights and against state repressions. They're standing for what we in the European Union enjoy as normality, for the rule of law, for democracy, for personal liberty, for freedom of speech, for an independent media. But on the other hand, we have seen a state force used in an incredibly brutal way, and the European Union has been very harsh on condemning the torture and the violence perpetrated against peaceful protesters organized by the Lukashenko regime. Now, you mentioned the role of the European Parliament. The European Union has been active right from the beginning. The first who conveyed a message were the foreign ministers when they met last Friday. Already last Friday, the foreign minister stated that the elections in Belarus were neither free nor fair. And credible reports of domestic observers clearly show that the electoral process didn't meet the standards expected of an OSCE participating state. So the European Union doesn't accept the falsified election results presented by the Central Election Commission. This afternoon, you mentioned that the heads of government met. I welcome that the heads of government actually met. This was a very important signal, and I also welcome the conclusions all 27 heads of governments were able to agree on. This is the right step, in my view, regarding the worrying events in Belarus. The heads of government have confirmed that they don't recognize the election of the 9th of August. For the European Union, for our heads of government, these elections were also neither free nor fair. And they have also condemned strongly the imprisonment of peaceful protesters, the police violence, and the human rights violations. From my point of view, they conveyed three very important messages. The first one is the EU 27 demands an immediate end of the violence. Secondly, detained innocent protesters and all political prisoners have to be released unconditionally and without any delay. And thirdly, the European Union supports a national dialogue among government, opposition, and civil society in order to find a peaceful solution. The heads of government have also confirmed the decisions taken by the foreign ministers regarding targeted sanctions against those responsible for human rights violations and the manipulation of the elections. A concrete list of persons concerned is currently being drawn up and should be adopted, from my point of view, as soon as possible, definitely sooner than later. Let me underline one point which is important. The future of Belarus, in the end, can only be determined by its own citizens through a democratic process that protects their freedoms. That's why we strongly believe that an external intervention in this crisis would be the wrong way. You also mentioned the European Parliament, Ms. Nepp. We had a statement on Monday coming from 5 political groups, the 5 leading political groups in the European Parliament, the EPP, the Social Democrats, the Renew Group, the Greens, and the ECR. And in this joint statement, the 5 leaders, or the 5 groups, called for new and free elections in Belarus. Across party lines, we believe as a European Union, we can do and we must do further to further the cause of democracy and freedom in this country, also including by strengthening assistance to Belarusian civil society. That's why, and I'm coming to the end, we suggest the relaunch of targeted EU assistance programs to help repressed people in Belarus and their families. And on the other hand, we must immediately hold back any financial support to the government and state-controlled projects. Next Tuesday, we will have an additional meeting of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the European Parliament to discuss the situation in Belarus, and then the Foreign Affairs Ministers' Council will once again meet on the 27th and the 28th of August in Berlin for an informal meeting in the so-called Gimnich format to also discuss the situation. To close, the people in Belarus should decide about their future. We as a European Union want a democratic, independent, sovereign, prosperous and stable Belarus in our immediate neighborhood. That's what we are ready to continue our engagement, and we ask all other third parties also to respect the independence of the Belarusian people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister, for this insightful presentation of the vision of European Union, European Parliament as well, towards Belarus. We will definitely have questions about it from the audience. And now we are going to Gleb, who is our only Belarus-based guest for today. He can, of course, best shed the light on what is happening on the ground from youth perspective. He is a young journalist and also a vice president of European Youth Parliament in Belarus. So he could also, and you, Gleb, could also address the question about how it is to run an NGO in Belarus. Please tell us what is going on in your country. If we put it like in short, how do you see it? What has changed in the past days in your view on Belarusian society?
Okay, good evening, everybody. So I think I will give you a quick, very fresh overview of what is going on like today, right now, at this very minute in Belarus. So you would better understand what is going on. While reading news, you will better understand why something is happening and how it is going on. And I have to start by saying that the situation in Belarus is much, much broader than just about young people being angry at the president. The whole country is very dissatisfied with his work, if to say it in a polite way. So, an overview of what's going on. After the biggest protest in the history, which happened on Sunday, we are now in quite a depressed mood. Because it's very normal to have a little fall after such a success. People need some rest, people are tired. And the thing about our protests, very important thing, is our protests are very decentralized and unorganized. They are based on pure emotions, on Belarusians being very angry at Lukashenko's violence, which he used last week. So seeing protests now being smaller upsets some people, but I see in social media that people are actively support each other, and experts explain that this depressed mood right now is okay, and it will get better closer to the weekends, where, as I expect, we will try to organize another huge march like we had last Sunday. Maybe our plan would be different. It isn't announced yet, so I don't know so far, but I think we will try to organize another march. So yesterday, the Coordination Council was announced, which is consisted of about 70 or 60, 70 people who are hugely respected in the country, and they all are exactly in the country. So Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is not a part of this Coordination Council. The main aim of this council is to help in transition of power. Of course, Lukashenko isn't going to transit his power, but at least now we have a group of people who have the right to speak on our behalf. And today, the presidium of this Coordination Council was chosen, consisted of 7 people. Most of them were very active during the election protests. They were part of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya team. but still we see some new people coming, like Pavel Latushka, who was a minister of culture years ago, like around 2010. Another very important thing is about strikes, which are happening right now in Belarus. With Lukashenko being a very Soviet ruler, he's proud of these old factories still working with thousands of people in them, though they are very unprofitable for the economy. Having strikes at them is quite personal for Lukashenko, and I'm sure he's offended by that. And it's very important to mention that without strikes, without workers supporting protesters, there is no way to win. There is no way we can stop Lukashenko. But he has a lot of power to suppress strikers, and paradoxically, firing strikers from the state-owned factories is profitable for the economy. So we can expect there will be a lot of people fired, and we need to support them. That's what we are doing right now. Now this coordination council and some more initiatives are working hard on helping workers to organize strikes legally and to help them financially if they would be fired, like initiatives like helping their children with free courses, which would help them get into the university and this kind of stuff. And of course, just giving some money to them. So right now, protests are based not on young people, but on older generation around 35, 45 years old. Students are participating as well, but since they are on holidays, they can't do something special like strikes in the universities. But if the protests will continue for weeks or months, most of the universities will try to go on strikes as well. But it's impossible to predict how massive they will be. So, and like as a conclusion, I don't have any predictions of what is going to happen in the future, even tomorrow. I don't really want to try to predict because nobody can do it correctly. Situation is changing every hour, though now it's getting more calm. Like today, riot police is back on the streets, and they try to don't give us a chance to gather in big crowds, but without any violence so far. It's only a few detainees. I think this strategy will continue, but I also believe that Lukashenko may use the same violence as we have seen last week if the situation will get so critical for him that he wouldn't have any other option. I mean, on the last days of his power. I think that's it.
Thank you, Gleb. Also perfectly managed with the time, and we'll definitely address few of your points in our discussion. Now I want to give a chance to Olga to continue your talk about main trends, but I will ask it in a question, and I think you will get how it is connection to the trends that we could observe in Belarus now. Deutsche Welle has mentioned a new diplomat who wanted to stay unnamed, who said, we have to avoid anything that might give Russian President Vladimir Putin an excuse to intervene in the conflict militarily. We do not need a second Ukraine. Why would you say the Belarusian example is different from Ukraine in 2014? Could the events in Belarus at all be compared with events in Ukraine, according to also the trends that you mentioned? And if not, then why?
Okay, thank you, Helena. Then I'll just start with another trend, which is also I can just connect it, to the difference to the Ukraine, because it's really important to understand. And I don't have the feeling that, everybody in Europe and European Union has this understanding of this feeling, what is happening there geopolitically. So it's really important to understand that people, the protest moods of people that we observe for a couple of months already, they really do not have to do anything with geopolitics. So we do not have, people who are strongly pro-Russian or pro-European and who take part in this protest. I mean, they might be, of course, by their nature, but it's not the reason for them, so to say, to take part in this protest. So those protests are really against the current president and against the current state system. People are not content with the falsification, with the mass falsification of elections. People are shocked by this unprecedented level of violence in Belarus. And maybe just to make it also clear, I mean, it's nothing new for the Belarusian reality that elections are being falsified or that people are being tortured in prisons. Unfortunately, it is fact. So it's really nothing new for Belarus. But what is now new, and why are we seeing this huge wave of protests in Belarus, is that quite a great number of people, maybe even the majority of them, really either saw it with their eyes, because also the mobilization for election observation, for local election observation, was really unprecedented, and we didn't have any international observers at this time. So the team of Tikhanovskaya just tried to mobilize people to observe the elections, and people saw it for the first time maybe in their lives, that elections are really being falsified. And then you can imagine if there were over 7,000 people arrested. You can imagine how many people were met. If we're talking about friends and relatives. So it has become really a national tragedy. So it's really, you know, this scale, this scale of knowledge among people. So it's not the very fact of violence or falsification, but how many people just saw it with their eyes or heard from their relatives and friends, and it's really important to understand. So it's really a Belarusian protest. It's not anti-Russian or pro-European protest, it's a Belarusian protest under the slogan "Everybody but one." And I think it's one of the most important difference from the Ukraine, because people in the Ukraine really standing there for, you know, for the European future. We saw quite a lot of flags of the European Union, which you do not really see in Belarus. Just a couple of them I saw, but it's not a trend at all. Also this regional scope, I would say that we didn't see it in the Ukraine, so everything was concentrated in the capital, and it was also the case before in Belarus, but now it's different. So it's really regional, it's decentralized, and it doesn't have any political, you know, political center. And when it brings us then to, or I don't know, this Russian question, I don't know if you still want to ask it later, because it's also, you know, connected to this geopolitical dimension. I don't think I still have time, but maybe I will talk about the, you know, the possible reaction of Russia and this this problematic of geopolitical vision of, you know, this conflict, because I also see it here. I see quite a lot of actors here in the European Union seeing this protest as geopolitical. And of course, there are those people also sitting in Russia, and those people who take decisions, but maybe we'll come to that later. Thank you.
Yes, for sure. Even I already saw some questions about it, so we'll go back to this. And now I would like to again go to our European vision and to Mr. McAllister and ask him a question that also, of course, I've been asking myself as Belarusian and as someone who also studied European studies for many years. In the past years, we saw some inconsistency, I would call it, of EU's position towards Belarus. Although Lukashenko rules the country since 26 years, and nearly all elections had fraud allegations. For example, after the last Belarusian presidential elections in 2015, the EU decided to lift most of the sanctions targeting Minsk. And in the next years, we also could observe some rapprochement between the EU and Belarus. And the same I could remember from the year 2009, before the elections in 2010. What is the EU strategy now? And do you think from now on, after seeing all the brutality, there will no be this softening of the position towards Lukashenko? You need to unmute yourself.
I need to unmute myself. Okay, wait a moment. Now, well, Belarus is one of the 6 important countries of our Eastern neighborhood, our Eastern partnership. I would say the European Union has been following a policy of critical engagement with the country. I remember as European Parliament, we have always condemned existing fundamental restrictions on basic freedoms and human rights. For instance, the ongoing application of the death penalty in Belarus is unacceptable. And in addition, we have seen how the freedom of media in Belarus has significantly deteriorated over the years. The European Union doesn't have any treaty-based contractual relationship with Belarus, but for the last years, the EU-Belarus cooperation has increased, and we have doubled our EU assistance for the country to around 30 million euros annually. And I think a major step forward was the visa facilitation and readmission agreement, which was signed in January 2020 and then entered into force on the 1st of July. These steps I consider as important steps forward, especially beneficial for the citizens of Belarus. However, and I must agree with you, for instance, in the 2019 parliamentary elections, an overall disregard for the fundamental freedoms of assembly, association, and expression were already to be observed. And that's why, as a European Union, we paid very close attention to the presidential election campaign right from the beginning. And before the elections, we also decided that we wouldn't observe these presidential elections because they don't match our necessary standards. So the situation in the moment, if the regime of Mr. Lukashenko continues like this, will have serious consequences for our EU relations with Belarus. And what we now have to do is, as I mentioned, we need to support civil society in the country. And let me just add one point Olga just made. I couldn't agree more. The peaceful protests in Belarus are not anti-Russian, but they're also not pro-Europe. The difference to the events in Ukraine in 2014, for instance, is the total absence of European flags in Minsk. This protest is not about this country joining the European Union or even NATO, nothing of the kind. The people are protesting against Mr. Lukashenko, the unfair elections, and the brutality of his security forces. So we have to show solidarity with the citizens of Belarus. We have to support their cry and their call for free and fair elections. But on the other hand, we have to be very careful not to set any kind of incentive for Mr. Putin to talk about an illegitimate influence coming from the West. That's why we have to be clear in our language, cautious in the next steps we take, but we have to be very clear on which side we are. But we also have to maintain diplomatic channels with Russia, because of course Russia, as the largest neighbor of Belarus, will play an important role in the future development of this country.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister. We'll definitely also address a question about Russia's role in there, as I also promised it to Olga, and our guests are also interested in this question. And now let's go to Nepp. And here I would like to ask you one question that, of course, I've been asking myself since I left Belarus. In my time in UIP Belarus, when I joined the organization 14 years ago, our NGO was functioning in the sort of underground. We were not allowed to hold any events in the country. Members, ordinary members who just attended the events, including myself, were also oppressed by state security. In real words, we even had to avoid talking on the phone about UIP or mentioning UIP. Now, 14 years, now it's 14 years has passed since then. How is it to operate as civil society, as NGO, under the current regime?
Well, it's tough. It's not that difficult as it was in your time 14 years ago. Like it's more liberal now, and like we can speak about EYP and we can organize events, but the thing is, since we weren't officially registered until June this year, all our events were organized, like officially they were organized by other organization, youth organization, like Students Association or anybody else. And sometimes when we were trying to find a place for parts of our events, we weren't saying that it is EYP. We were trying to say like it's something else, like pretty something quite UN model or something like this. So running the biggest issue in running NGO in Belarus is about finances, because it's very bring money to the country legally without like giving 50% of it to the government, and like, and if your organization is not officially registered, pretty much you don't have a legal way of getting money. And like for all the existence of EYP Belarus, we were trying to find other ways to get a grant and to bring this money in the territory in Belarus. Another issues, well, like, yeah, issues about laws breaking, because like it depends on what kind of NGO you do run. Like if it's something about human rights, you probably would have some difficulties. If it's just educational one, probably wouldn't have problems. You would just run as you run and it's okay. Maybe even schools or universities will cooperate with you at some points, but yeah, basically the biggest issue is financial one.
And sorry,
yeah.
just a short follow-up question. Do you expect the situation to change in case if this uprising will not bring the results that everyone, the protesters, are hoping for?
Okay, that's a good question, because in the board of EYP Belarus we talked a little bit about it yesterday, because yesterday we made a post for the first time in this August. We first time made a post about what is happening. We were trying to stay silent for a time, but we decided that there are like two options. If protests win, then we will be fine, we will live, we will improve, develop, and so on. And by making a post and about not being silent, we help this protest to win. And if the protests lose and Lukashenko will stay in power, we can expect that we will become a true dictatorship with everything independent being suppressed very, very strongly. And like I can assure you that EYP Belarus will stop its existence in case Lukashenko winning in this fight. And pretty much anything else, like most of the NGOs, independent media, IT business and stuff will be pretty much suppressed and crushed, and all the other words to explain that.
Thank you, Gleb, for explaining this vision. It's a difficult condition that you're in, and we are really impressed by the work that EYP Belarus have been doing throughout this whole years, also in the past, because it's really unprecedented. We are the network of 40 countries, and we know which problems in every country there are, and it's really even emotional, difficult to realize that you are dealing with similar problems that we were dealing nearly 15 years ago and even more. Thank you for this honest statement, and definitely like a great courage for EYP Belarus that you put on that post yesterday. Yes, so on this note, we will be now going into open discussion, and we have already quite a lot of questions. So thank you, dear our guests, that you were so active. And we will start with a question by Alan Flowers, and then we will go for questions that some of you posted in the question and answer section. So Mr. Alan Flowers, you can speak up now.
Thank you. I see we're not getting video. I'm Alan Flowers speaking from London. I'm hugely honoured and want to thank Schwarzkopf Foundation for organising this. It was myself that was asked to start EYP in Belarus back in 1998, and it was also in Belarus in 94 when the one honest election took place. So I could comment a lot. If I could just be permitted to make one brief congratulations comment to David McAllister and the EU. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is wonderful, the speed of response we've seen this time. I was very active. I've been active in every presidential election and close to it. Andrei Sanikov, I'm pleased to be honored as a good friend of mine. And in 2010, it took about 3 months to get the sanctions on, if you look at the detailed history. The speed and response we have seen this time is absolutely almost as much as could be expected. We know there's a lot of technical issues, and it's on the sanctions issue I'm going to raise my my question. Speaking as a British citizen, with a Britain that has made a Brexit so as to act independently, I have to say there is gross, enormous disappointment amongst the British Belarusian community at the slow speed with which United Kingdom has reacted, and very surprised that Britain just appears to be doing a following act from the very great work you're doing there, David, and your team, everybody. Superb. I would like to express a word of caution about consultative councils. The real issue is how does one persuade the former, I will call him former President Lukashenko, the man who has his hands on the levers of power and the state apparatus of oppression. 1,500 OMON, his own security services, paid high salaries. There's a bought loyalty there. This is not going to be an easy persuasion. I finally want to get a note to Kleb. I'm very pleased we know each other well. EYP ran, not registered. We know the tools. And by the way, it was mainly, no secret now, Britain and the German Foreign Office that supported EYP, but by the simple technique of providing funding for individual Belarus youth to participate in democracy projects outside Belarus. Helena will remember the cities of Bialystok, Daugavpils, and of course Lviv grew as a great center for that. So yeah, EYP registered form may go, but EYP won't. And now the question, what to all of you is the tool or tools that you feel will be most effective in, firstly, the diminution of the torture, the direct tool. Clearly there's a section of sanctions there. And secondly, to bring Mr. Lukashenko to the negotiating table. What's the most effective tool we feel we can be applying that could succeed in doing that? That's the objective.
Thank you, Alan. Yes, thank you for your question. I think it's there are two questions, and one is for David McAllister and one from Nepp. So could you maybe then just note it down, and we take one more question. And please, because we don't have that much time, I would ask you to be as short as possible and really just ask a question and not comment, but we really appreciate the information that Alan Flowers gave us. So, and now we would go to Mark Demesmaker.
Good evening. I hope you hear me well. My name is indeed Mark de Mesmaker. I'm a member of Parliament in Belgium and also a former member of the European Parliament. Hi, David. Yes, I remember, for instance, our work and my personal sponsorship for Johan Vaskovic, the young journalist, for his release. And I think he was released eventually. I don't know how he is for the moment. But anyway, the question here in the press, also today, in all the papers, on the news, on television, is quit Russia and quit Putin. We know very well that Putin is very much afraid of a spillover of any successful democratic revolution or uprisal to Russia. And you should, or you could expect him to be in favor of the president crushing the protests. The Union Treaty of '99 can give him the legitimation also to intervene, really, and he can find a reason to do so anyway. But he might also be realistic and realize that this is a very dangerous path to go, and maybe he could support a transitional figure. And there is my first question. I'm a bit in doubt about the leadership, really, of the opposition. There is indeed a council. Ms. Tikhanovskaya is an important symbol, but is there a real leadership in the opposition that is ready to step in and fill the gap, fill the power vacuum, if there would be so? Second question for our people on the ground in Belarus. Russia, of course, we know that playbook, has some other more hybrid ways to intervene, like sending specialists and experts when, for instance, state-owned companies go on strike, including state television. And that's exactly what happened today, if I must believe the news items that I read today. Is this really the case? Is this happening? Is this going on? And then a question or suggestion for the EU, for David. It was very important to point out the difference with the events in Ukraine. I was in Ukraine many times from 2014 and onwards. And I think it's very important to make clear to the Russian Federation that there is a way of resolving this in a decent way, through dialogue, in a peaceful way. And I think the EU could step in with an offer, conducting a dialogue that includes Russia. And this could be done, for instance, via the OSCE. This is a body that counts all the member states of the EU, but also Russia. And I say this as a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, which was not invited to monitor the elections, by the way. These were my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And now we will go back to our panelists. And we had now a question from Alan Flowers to Mr. McAllister, and question now from Mark to Mr. McAllister, and question from Alan Flowers to Hleb. And I see now that we also have quite a lot of questions in the chat regarding EU position or action. So Andrew asked, how can we express our position as EU organization which is working in human rights and in the same time support the people of Belarus and Belarusians? That's also like a good question that Olga could address. Yes, so Mr. McAllister, maybe you will start.
You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the questions. I'll be very brief. The first point was on sanctions. The heads of government today, the 27, have decided, according to the conclusions released shortly after the meeting under point 5, quote, the EU will shortly impose sanctions against a substantial number of individuals responsible for violence, repression and the falsification of election results, unquote. I understand that the European External Action Service is working on a concrete list, and this will have to be agreed by the foreign ministers. On this basis, the European Union, for example, could have the possibility of Schengen visa denial, to freeze assets of third country bank accounts, and to freeze bank transfers out of the country. What we also have to do, as I mentioned, is we should seize any financial support to the government and state-controlled projects. And the European Union today announced that Belarus will get an additional 50 million euro support for fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. We have to make sure that this money is actually spent on this important health issue and not channeled into any other black boxes of the Lukashenko regime. That was my first point. The second point, what we also need to prioritize is how to support civil society in Belarus in a sustainable way. I think that we have a lot of experience in strengthening civil society in transition countries, and we are certainly ready to offer any kind of expertise in shaping the political and economic transformation. And the third point on Russia, I would like to echo what Mark de Mesmaeker said. What we also need in this situation now is effective and active back-channel diplomacy with Russia. And one message to Russia could be, this protest in Belarus is not about geopolitics. As I said, the people are protesting against the regime of Mr. Lukashenko, the unfair elections and the brutality of his security forces. And one example for change, what happened in Armenia in 2018. I mean, the situation in Belarus is compared with some people with the situation in Ukraine, which I agree isn't the right comparison. But for instance, if you look at what happened in Armenia in 2018, you could see that Russia can also have whatever kind of good relations with post-revolutionary governments. And that is an additional argument why Russia should not interfere in the internal developments in Belarus, and that once again the EU will not actively pursue a geopolitical agenda in Belarus. We want to support the people, and that this is important. So I couldn't agree more with what Mark de Mesmaeker, my friendly colleague from the last term of the European Parliament, just said.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister. Now we will go to Hleb, and I will give you 1 minute to respond. So I will be now tracking time a bit more strictly because we still have quite a lot of questions.
I actually didn't get what the question from Mr. Flowers was, but I remember I heard a question from Mark about Russian interference in our situation. So maybe I should better ask quickly about it, answer quickly about it.
Yes, thank you.
The thing about Mr. Putin is very, very difficult because nobody really understands if he's willing to interfere strongly in what is going on in Belarus. So far, yes, we see media people helping our state TV because people from state TV are getting fired and they're protesting, so Russians helping here. Maybe there will be some specialists in police field to help, but I don't really believe, and I don't really think many Belarusians also would believe that Mr. Putin would bring soldiers in our country. So far, he could understand that Lukashenko is in a very weak position right now, and to help him is the same as cut all the relations with Belarusian nation. He would get these angry people against him, so he could understand it, and maybe will try to be on the side, and we'll just wait until we decide on something, and then we'll interfere to the winning part of this fight, help the winning part of this fight.
Thank you, Gleb. Yes, thank you so much. And now we are going to Olga, and we have quite a lot of questions on also what is the role of Putin in this game. Partly Mr. McAllister already addressed this, and you can speak then on the behalf of the research side. Is Moscow supporting Lukashenko with experts, including media, post-National Guard for further repressions? That also was the question from the audience. So, Olga, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Those are really important questions, and I'll try to connect, this point of Russia. Also, the question about the problem of opposition without a leader is also very important to understand what is happening there now, and also come with this opposition question to the possible role of the EU, to also with a direct question to Mr. McAllister, because I think you mentioned quite important points in this regard. So to Russia, I mean, I still do not see any military, well, I mean, we never know what's in the head of Putin, right? So I try to think logically, and if we try, to stay calm and logical, there are really no important reasons for a possible military intervention right now for the moment from Russia and Belarus. But of course, we're not talking, I mean, I do not say that there is no interest to preserve the influence that Russia already has in Belarus, right? So the union state of Russia and Belarus is still in power, and also this unprecedented economic dependence of Belarus from the Russian market, from the Russian credits. It will not go even if Lukashenko leaves, the state is not president anymore. So all these levels, of influence in Belarus, they will stay. Of course, we also have this, soft power, like cultural and mental closeness, so to say, between Belarusians and Russians. We have media, Russian-speaking media, which is still very popular in Belarus. We have the whole cultural and the professional exchange programs. We have Orthodox Church, by the way, which is also part of the Russian power, soft power in Belarus. So there are quite a lot of instruments of Russian influence outside of this military intervention. And actually, Belarusian society seems to be, the most friendly in terms of Russian society and the post-Soviet space. So it would be really, I would say it could be really a big mistake to lose this social support, because as already mentioned, the Prud is by no way anti-Russian. So, any military intervention by this level of a feeling of a united nation that we see now in Belarus, that would really lead to, to these high waves of hatred in terms of the Russian society and Russian politics. So I think well, it doesn't seem really logical for me. And even if we think about the most popular potential candidate, which was Mr. Babarika, he was the ex-head of Belgazprom Bank, and he never said anything bad about Russia. So it's really, it could have been even a convenient president for the Russian side. So there was nothing anti-Russian in the speeches of potential candidates and also during the protests in Belarus. But we never know. I mean, Russia can also react, emotionally, so we can now know that. Now coming to this opposition question, that's really now the problem, because Tikhanovskaya, is a symbolic figure. She's not politician. I see that I'm in it left. She's not politician. So they try to make this public coordination council, which started to work today. They are trying, to find people who would represent a very broad Belarusian society, like civil society, opposition, some well-known people, even the foreign minister of culture and so on. And what I was actually intending to ask Mr. McAllister, because he mentioned that the European Union actually wants, to extend from any external intervention. It would be the wrong way, which is actually right also from my point of view. But maybe you already heard that the coordination committee, this public coordination committee, already mentioned the possibility of mediation or maybe some kind of observation from the European Union in this dialogue, if it comes to dialogue between the state and society in Belarus. So what is your opinion on that? Would it be even more dangerous if we think about, what Russia would think about that? Would it be, maybe it would make sense even to invite the Russian side to take part in this mediation process, so that they do not have, this feeling that everything is being controlled from the West side? Because OSCE is something different than the European Union, and the coordination committee was actually talking about the European Union. So it's something different, because Russia is not a member of the European Union. What is your opinion on that?
Mr. McAllister, you can directly address this question.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, Olga just mentioned exactly the rather delicate situation. We need, as a European Union, to be very careful with our actions, avoiding to be seen in any regard as political campaigners interfering from the outside, because this would add fuel to the fire, giving ground to Lukashenko and Putin's camp. So in whichever direction the country will move, this move is a self-determined and sovereign decision by the Belarusian people. The situation is still very fluid. Now, what can the European Union do? The European Union can offer its support in facilitating a dialogue with all Belarusian actors. This is how I understood the heads of government today, because they said, we call on an inclusive national dialogue. Only a peaceful and democratic process underpinned by independent and free media and a strong civil society can provide sustainable solutions. All parties, including third states, should support such a process. So it's a dialogue in Belarus where we can give support. Now, on cooperation with Russia, I believe, yes, cooperation with Russia will be necessary in this case. And I believe that we can cooperate with Russia here, even though we have and will continue to have serious differences on other issues like Ukraine. Finally, the European Union should call for free and fair elections. This should probably best be monitored by the OSCE. Of course, EU mediation should be offered, but it could be that these offers would be refused, and then I think the OSCE is the institution, because this is the organization where not only Belarus but also Russia are members.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister. Hleb, there are two questions on you now, and one of them is from Alan Flowers. He would like to hear your perspective on, could you comment on what do you think, how to bring Lukashenko to negotiation table, and also how would you imagine the continuation of EYP in non-registered form? So that's one question. And another question, very different one, comes from Yannick. He saw some reports on restrictions on internet services, indeed, but I'm not sure how credible those are. So could you give us a short summary of how it is now with the internet, how internet has been censored since the election? Are there attempts to try to restrict digital organization of protests?
Okay, I will start with internet because it's most simple to answer. Internet was shut down for 3 days, August 9, 10, 11. Mobile internet wasn't working at all. There were no way to get into the internet through your phone, but it was working with a few VPNs. Psiphone being the most popular one. I think 30% of population of Belarus now has a Psiphone on their laptop or PC. I'm not an expert in technical details to explain how it was shut down, but I've read some text and it looks like very interesting and difficult way to block the internet. It was something new. It wasn't just blocking websites. Since Wednesday last week, internet is working more or less properly, but some websites like independent media are still not working correctly. Like sometimes they open, sometimes not. And a few websites as well have the same issue, but overall internet is fine. It was only shut down for 10 minutes on Monday, and that's basically all. And about digital organization of protests, I don't see governments trying to block it. because the only way to block it is to shut down the internet, and they are not doing it right now. I don't know why. Maybe they understand it's very difficult for the economy, because it's something about $50 million a day without internet, a cost of internet being shut down for the Belarusian economy. So yeah, we are organized through Telegram, and it works properly. And about Mr. Flowers' questions, running EYP without registration is nothing new to us, and we'll try to continue as it is right now. And if we win, I think it wouldn't be a problem to get a registration. And about how to get Lukashenko to the negotiation table, I honestly don't know. He doesn't look like a person who will sit and try to negotiate. He only understands power. That's why he's a friend of Putin. I think maybe somehow through the economy, through sanctions, there is a way to get him in at the table, or maybe Putin can do something about it. But I don't really see a way to get him at the table in the week or something. Maybe in months there is a way, like with the economy being just shut down and destroyed, maybe then he finally will sit and talk. But so far, no, I don't know.
Thank you, Nepp, for also your honesty. Yes, we have a point from Mr. McAllister. You should unmute yourself.
I would just like to add one point. The European Union should clearly stress that the sanctions will target individuals and not companies and the population. It's about targeting those individuals who are responsible for these outrageous activities of the Belarusian authorities.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister. And I see that Olga also has a point. So Olga, please, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, just a few words about, this very difficult question: what could bring Lukashenko to negotiations? He really doesn't seem to wish that, so to say. And just to give you very interesting information, I think it was yesterday, right? Yesterday he awarded 300 security officials with medals for irreproachable services. So, instead of apologizing in front of own population for this unprecedented violence, he kind of shows and encourages those responsible for it, which shows us that he's still sure, about this. One of the important pillar of his power is security services, and the whole power vertical is although we already see that some local authorities in Grodno have already, so to say, started to cooperate with people, but this most important pillar, security, Minister of Internal Affairs, this pillar is still with him. So I think the only possibility to make real pressure on him is really the economic possibility, but not through the sanctions, because as Mr. McAllister already mentioned, those sanctions are just personal sanctions, and they would not make much difference because it's really about staying in power for the president now. But economic pressure coming from the strikes, if the strikes really would become nationwide, and if the strikes really would last for a couple of weeks, then, everybody understands that Belarusian economy is not in this state that, would stand that for weeks or months. And this could work, maybe even, this could work if, in this case of this economic pressure coming from the strikes, Lukashenko doesn't have support from Russia. So I think these two factors are very important, because when they do not come together, well, we really could have a very bad scenario, about the, we would have then radicalized workers because they do not have money, and maybe the protests would not be that peaceful anymore. And this would be a good, for Russia, a good point to intervene and to come, to bring order in the country. So it's a very, very dangerous scenario.
Thank you, Olga. That was definitely a valuable point in the discussion. We had a lot of questions. We could address some. Unfortunately, our time limit didn't allow us to go through all questions, but I'm sure thanks to the insightful answers, you received a lot of information on the questions that were interesting to you, dear guests. And we definitely will be planning some follow-up events on events in Belarus, on the situation. There will be definitely a lot of developments. We want to close on a positive note, and we have one question to every speaker because each of you bring a different perspective, and it's a simple question, and you will be asked just to answer with maximum one sentence, not a big statement. In the Schwarzkopf Foundation and in EYP, we of course focus on the future. We focus on empowering young people and on how the future will look like if those young people are empowered today. So I want to ask you a question. How do you wish to see Belarus in 5 years? And let's go in the same order how we did in the start. So starting with Olga, if you're ready.
A free national state of people who believe in themselves.
Thank you. Mr. McAllister? You need to, yeah.
A post-Lukashenko Belarus will hopefully be an active and young democracy based on the rule of law, economically successful, and a good neighbor and cooperation partner of the European Union and other neighbors.
Thank you. And now Gleb.
Economically and politically independent state with free elections every 4 or 5 years.
Thank you. That was indeed a powerful exercise, just looking in the future. Let's hope that everything we discussed today will help us and help our guests to also in the networks where you are to share those main messages. I hope that while watching today's news and those which will come in the next weeks, you will now have a bit better reflected view on Belarus, and that also you will be sharing this view among people that you are in touch with. We need to raise awareness about what is happening in the country. And it's just so complex that definitely we didn't answer all questions, but we tried with our great experts our best. And now I'm giving the word again to Dominic.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot left to say, but time is running out. So I just want to thank you, Helena, for the moderation, and want to thank especially our 3 guests for this very, very interesting insights and thoughts about Belarus and I think we're all following closely the events in the next days. So thank you very much again, David, McAllister, Gleb, and Olga for spending time with us. Just allow me a last advertising block for an event we're going to have next week, actually. It's unfortunately in German, but we're going to have a closer look on the fight against right-wing extremism, racism, and discrimination. And we're going to see what the government is currently doing and what is the state of the art. And please follow us on social media and on our channels and on the homepage or our mailing list for future events. And we try to make some more from time to time in English. At this point, there's only left to say thank you very much again, and I wish you all a very nice evening.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Helena.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Have a good evening.